watching over us, I believe, so we're here. And we brought umbrellas. I'm Anna lead the board. Elle and John are on the board. Nancy's on the board. Did I hit everybody? Diane, Linda. Sorry. It's been a long day already. Before I really get started, I want to take just a minute, and he's going to kill me. But I would like to thank Max Wyatt for all he does here. We would not, honestly, we would not have a museum that does what this one is able to do if it wasn't for Max. He is here, he's working at home, and when there's a foot or two of snow on the ground, hey guys, come on in and find a seat. We can get you some more chairs too if we need to. But I don't know how many emails he answers or requests for, hey, here's a picture. You know any idea who this is? And Max will find it. Plus, he's digitizing, organizing, and he's going back through a ton of paperwork to try to get it all straight. So I told him he's going to be my age or older before it's all done. But if anybody's going to get it done, it will be Max. So can we give him a hand? One other thing we're trying this year, it was a suggestion from last year, we are videotaping all of our speakers now. So our friends who can't make it to the meeting or who live far away will be able to get, will be on Facebook, Max? Okay. If you don't want to be videotaped, kind of go off to one side. And also, if you don't mind, if you flip your phones on silent, if they're not already, and that way it kind of will interrupt our speaker up here. We don't want to distract you.
$50 fine, let's call it.
First time I ever met you, and I'm going to tell this on Isaac because I had never met the judge. And I hauled my history class after school up to the Stone Tavern, and he was like, no phones. And I was like, okay, got kids' phones, but what? I pulled out my camera, and he goes, is that a phone? I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to fall for it. But, what's up, sir? Starting tomorrow and going through the end of October, we'll be open 6 days a week. We'll be open Monday through Saturday from noon until 4. And we will be on Saturdays. Max will be here Monday through Friday, and we will run with volunteers on Saturday. So if you are bored and want something to do on a Saturday, we'll hook you up with one of the board members and us, and we won't ever stick you down here by yourself. That's not fair. But sometimes we're here for 4 hours and nobody comes through the door. And if it's the Song of a Mountains weekend, it's just nonstop people through here. We have a few new displays back here where Max is videoing. Marion College had their reunion luncheon here, and we set up a display for them. That was fun to get those people together in March. So we've got an actual dress that was worn to the May Day court, plus some older pictures and pictures of the college and diplomas. We have our toy display. We lit a lot of our toys, or several of our toys, to the William King, and they put them on display over Christmas, and we've gotten them back, and they are in that little section. And also, Elle just set up a whole new display on cameras. One's from this gigantic camera to this small camera. So when we're through here, you're welcome to wander around. If you've got any questions, just grab one of us. During the winter, we did close pretty much after the Christmas market, and that went really well. We had, I think it was 10 or 11 trees this year. We had the Head Start little kids in here for Christmas and Santa Claus. Martin Luther King Day, the Emory and Henry School of Health Sciences sent us a group of young people, and they put all the Christmas trees away up all these stairs, because if you've been in this building, there's no elevator. So when you've got a 7 or 8 foot tree, it's intimidating. And they were up there in 2 hours. They had this place cleaned up and set up most of the things in the window out front. And then we had the Martin Luther King kids, and then the Marion College. If you're interested in joining the Historical Society and being part of the museum, we do have membership. Max membership is, do you remember how much?
25 individual.
$25 a person for a year. And your money will go to help support and pay the bills and keep us going. Our next speaker, if you didn't get a little slip, is May 21st. It's the Sunday after Mother's Day, and the new director of tourism for Wythe County is coming down, and the topic is the polio epidemic that was rampant in Wytheville in 1950. So I don't think we've ever had a speaker on that topic. Okay, a couple other things. We have a new awning out front. I don't know if you were able to see. We used to have the shaker things, and every time it rained hard or the wind would blow, we'd have to go pick up little pieces of crumbling shakers. So, thanks to the town and to donations from our members, we were able to replace that with a metal roof. And I want to thank everybody. The Madam Russell marker that we were hoping to get enough money to replace has been paid for, and it's hopefully will be placed at her graveside in September when Overmountain men come down to Aspenville Cemetery. That was a big fundraiser, and it went really well, and we thank you, because it was more money than what we could raise, but with everybody pitching in, it worked out well. Our newest adventure, you can't put me and Max down here in the winter with nothing to do without us getting in trouble. And I don't know if you remember seeing it or not, but back in the Civil War section was a brown wooden box, and folded up in that box was a uniform. Okay. Well, there's a lady out of Richmond who runs an organization, or she and some friends restore old military uniforms. And we have talked with her, and she's supposed to be coming down to the William King sometime, like in May. She's going to come by and check it out. But it's been in this box, like, how long? Years. Right?
That's how we got it.
Yeah,
It came to us in the box.
Right,
We
it
didn't put
had
it-
glass front on the box, and so Max and I opened the box. At first, it looked like it wasn't in bad shape. The lady goes, oh, $500 or $600 should be plenty to restore it. Then we took it out, and it was not good. Okay. It is in pretty rough shape, but the cool part is, I don't know if you can see it or not, there's a hole in the collar of his uniform. That's where the bullet went through at Gettysburg. So he must have been bending over and it went straight through. There is another big hole in the left lower part of the uniform. That's from shrapnel he got at one of the battles in the Shenandoah Valley. He got wounded pretty badly. He was able to get to Charlottesville, stayed with an aunt, then went from his aunt's house. He met one of his distant cousins, fell in love with her, married her, brought her home to 7 Mile Ford. And the Preston house, that's the controversy in 7 Mile Ford, that was his home. His parents had built that. And they lived there. So this is the uniform of John Montgomery Preston II. It was donated to the museum by John Montgomery Preston the 4th or 5th. Anyway, I called, I just picked up the phone. And I had the letter, the donation letter that we found in a box, and I Googled it, found the lady's name. She answered her phone. I asked to speak with her husband. He passed away. I told her who I was. She was so excited that there is a chance that we can get this uniform restored. We're probably looking at $5,000 to $6,000. So this is going to take us, it will take her a while to restore it, take us a while to come up with the money, but we do have the display cabinet where the chair is, and that will be its new home. So get it going. So that's going to be our next fundraiser, but this is kind of what we're aiming at in the future. And we haven't had many donations over the winter because we've basically been closed, and Max has been working like crazy. But at Farmers Club in Rich Valley the other night, I'd heard about this. I'm not taking it out. I'm taking enough stuff apart without asking Max first. But it is a gas mask from World War I that belonged to John Lee Buchanan out of Rich Valley. So I got the paperwork from his great-grandson, and he signed off on church this morning, So this will go in our little one display. But if you ever have anything that you're like, wonder if they could use that down at the museum, call us, ask us, and we will, if it's a seashell collection from Hawaii, we probably can't use it. But if it's something from local that pertains to one of our displays, we would love. And you can put it on loan if you're not sure if you really want to get rid of it, or you can go ahead and donate it. Either way is fine. We do all the paperwork. Max has it all on the computer, and you can get it back, or you can just go ahead and donate it. Right now, our Indian display, our Native American display, is on loan from West Malloy. It's only supposed to have been for a year, but he's fine with it being down here. We're loving getting a chance to let people see it. Are there any questions? All right, now, you're up. Good luck.
Welcome, Judge Freeman. We're so glad to have you here. Can you hear me? Okay. Isaac and I have been friends for more than 40 years. In fact, his wife's family and my family from Danville go way back. And so I know a thing or two about Isaac, and I won't tell you everything I know about him. But anyway, he is an avid duck hunter and has hunted in Canada, United States, South America, probably other places too. But he is probably the only person I know who has an electric duck plucker. And he traumatized his children with it. And that's all I'm going to say. But anyway, he has participated in storytelling festivals all over, especially Jonesboro, but lots of different ones. He used to come to my first grade class when we did Appalachian Days, and he would tell stories to them. They were always enthralled. But he grew up in the Bristol area, at least that's where he went to high school, and has been a staple of this community for as long as I can remember. So he has supported this museum, he has supported everything that goes on in the town, and we are just lucky to have him. So today he's going to talk to you a little bit about storytelling and how you can write stories. And he's going to talk to you a little bit, and I'm not going to tell him everything you're going to do. But anyway, I know it'll be just fascinating because he's an excellent storyteller. So, Judge?
Well, just a few comments that have already been made is like opening up Pandora's box for me. Is this a directional line?
I think it is.
Okay.
I'll
I'll do as well as I can. And it's always odd to me that no matter how much time I have to prepare, something will be said immediately before I get up that will change everything. And so, just the gas mask deal, my father was in World War I, and he quit high school because they brought in a substitute teacher, and my father said he knew way more than the teacher knew, and talked his mother into quitting high school and worked at the air base. There was the fledgling Air Force was in Charlotte, North Carolina, out where the Charlotte Airport is now, and that bordered my grandfather's farm. And so it was actually a cavalry unit, so my father went over, and his first employment was shoveling horse manure out of the stalls at the air base. Now, believe it or stuff it, that's what I have to say. You can either believe me or stuff it. But he had a gas mask that we played with when we were kids. If I had known it was valuable enough to bring to the museum. And then Elle's comment about coming to the Appalachian Days. This is actually in my remarks. After I would finish telling, and I'm not a storyteller for children, but I would volunteer to go to the primary school to do this, and I would have to read up on some stories just to be able to pull it off. My stories are way more sophisticated than first graders, and so after the event at Appalachian, the kids could roam around and go to any tent that was available for the demonstrations during the Appalachian Days. And so inevitably, there'd be a bunch of them come over to my tent and they'd say, tell us another story. And I would say, well, give me a subject. And they'd say things like math, social studies. and so it was always comical in that regard. And typically, this is either the third or fourth time I've spoken to this society. And usually I have a historical character from Smyth County that I introduce just by talking about the career, and then having the members guess who I'm talking about. And I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to refer you to, well, first of all, I'm going to talk about me. And so just get used to it. I'm not a narcissist as far as I know, but I am going to, just because of the way the invitation came to me. And however, Dan Cagley, whom most of you would know, wrote a paper maybe as many as 20 years ago. And it's about two historical characters, one of whom was from Smyth County. And we're talking about the mid-1700s. And the person from Smyth County was contacted by a man in Grottoes, Virginia, which is near Lexington, and he said that he wanted, and I've given this talk at the Rotary Club. I'm seeing Huber here, and Bill, y'all know, I don't know if you remember this talk or not, but the man from Smyth County was a long hunter, lived in what is now St. Clair's Bottom, and was invited by this other man who lived in Grottoes to take an adventure with him. So the man from Smyth County went to Grottoes next to Lexington. They went up the Maury River, crossed the mountain, went down the Golly River, got into New River, went as far as they could go before they hit some serious water, crossed the ridge, got on what is now called Coal River, and went down all the way to where Coal River came back into the Kanawha, which is the same river as the New River, as some of you know. Went up to the Ohio, rode the Ohio down to the Mississippi, went down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, where all the French lived. Here were two Englishmen going into New Orleans. Well, they got locked in prison, and they stayed in the jail for 2 years before the man from Smyth County made an escape. The other man from Grottoes was sent to France as a spy. And then the story continues about how the guy from Smyth County worked his way across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, got into Florida, and then made it back to 7 Mile Ford. And it took him an additional 2 years to get back home. So I wasn't going to do that, but I've done it now. Can you guess who it was? late Charles St. Clair, named St. Clair's Bottom. And he was there when the first survey crew came through and made a promise that they would just survey out his farm in St. Clair's Bottom, that he would show them a prize. And the prize was, he showed them Burke's Garden. And I did not make that up. That's true. But the point that I'm making is that y'all ought to invite Dan Cantley to come and speak about that. I've given you a 2-minute version of what would be very interesting. And so when the notice went out for this meeting, it said conversations with Isaac Freeman. And so this is a conversation. I'm going to be talking, but anytime you want to interrupt, just interrupt. And we'll make it a conversation. And in preparation, I even went to the point of putting down, is this a lie or is this the truth? And so I have promised, and I even worked up one story where I would tell one sentence and say lie, next sentence the truth. And so the fact of the matter is, every story I tell is the truth. But I change the names of the people. Sometimes I change the places. And there are, when you tell an absolute true story, there are consequences. And I'll probably conclude my remarks by giving you 2 or 3 examples of that. And also in preparation, when Elle spoke to me on, well, let me go to the duck plucker. Okay, so some of you remember Elizabeth Smyth, who lived in Marion, was a teacher, the organist at the Lutheran Church, was probably one of the best known individuals in Smyth County before she ran off and got married, for goodness sakes. And I think she lives over in Boone, North Carolina now. But she was involved with the Senate of the Virginia, the Lutheran Senate. And part of that was they have a meeting once a year with a very large delegation of Lutherans from all over and it may include part of West Virginia also. I'm not sure, Bill would know. But it was at Roanoke College, and there was probably 250 people in the audience. And I just did a terrific show. I mean, I did it for half price because it was and so when we finished the show, I was sitting down, and she told this story, that she was teaching, I think, 5th grade, and the kids were a little out of control because it was the day before the Christmas holiday. And she knew that she wasn't going to be able to keep their attention very much, and so she had come up with a game to play, and the game was for each person. She taught science, and so each person in the class was to write down every electric appliance that the family had in their home. And so, if the first person said electric stove, then the rest of the class had to mark electric stove. And then the refrigerator, they marked it off. And so it was coming down, and they'd say, are there any more? They'd be, well, I've got a toaster, and I've got a telephone, and the hands would go up, and they'd name them as they went down the line. And Liz said that every time she called for another appliance, my daughter's hand would go up. This is Scott. And so she finally said, okay, Scott, what is the last electric appliance? You know her response? We have an electric duck plucker. And so And it wasn't trying, I would make my kids hold the ducks by the wings. I would use the electric duck plucker to pluck all the feathers off the body of the duck. Then I would take them in the garage, plug in the shop vac, and I would vacuum the feathers off the kids. They would be literally covered. I would have to do their hair, their bodies. I'd have them turn around backwards, and then I'd wait on a really windy day, and I would I feel guilty now. I would dump the feathers out between my house and Nell Starcher's. Some of you know or remember Nell. And it would be the season ended at the end of January, and by April, Nell would say, "Where are all these feathers coming from?" Bless her heart. But that was definitely not in my program. So, when I was a small kid, I could lie to my parents like a dog. And you think I'm kidding, but I'm not. I would just tell one lie after the next, and they believed me. And then the kids in the neighborhood started recognizing my talent, and so they would come and hire me to go to their parents and lie to them, and I'd start charging. I'd charge them like, sometimes it was a nickel, sometimes it was a piece of bubble gum, whatever. I've even taken a hot tomato right out of the garden as payment to lie for people. And this continued on until I was in school. I could drop down to one, even in college, I could drop to one knee and just lie to my professor, just give me a C, lady, just give me a C and I will never bother you again. And then, we'd go in middle school, be kissing some girl. Yes, darling, I do love you. And just all the way through. And I got so good that as I was finishing college, I thought, I could parlay this into a career. I could just go to law school. But anyway, the reason I'm mentioning this is because in preparation, Elle suggested that I talk about how you get into storytelling. And it is an industry. It's just like rock and roll. There are certain people that pay money to come and listen to storytellers. And I've been in 28 different states as an employed storyteller. And then Elle suggested that maybe I talk about how I got started and then making the transition to Jonesboro. After college, I worked 5 years for a congressman. And it was the most interesting times. It was from 1967 until 1971, 5 years. And if you think back during that time of history, the Vietnam War was hollering a $2 pistol, no pun intended. And the division in the country had started. The bird machine in Virginia was failing, that had operated the state of Virginia for decades and decades. And I was called upon to speak sometimes as many, or make an appearance at least 200 times a year. And so during that time, I developed a whole raft of stories that I could tell to either loosen up the audience or whatever. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of those. Bob Carter, who I don't think anyone here would remember Bob. He was a stockbroker in Bristol, but he was also a primitive Baptist preacher. And he would go down to his little family chapel down just in the edge of Scott County, down on Route 421. And it was called Carter's Chapel. And it was a primitive Baptist. Linda may remember. That's Sarah's daddy.
Right.
And so he...
His daughter taught me science in high school.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, in Beaver, Pennsylvania, of all places.
Well, Well, then you know who I'm talking about. Walk, brother, let her walk. And then the preacher said, and if the church is going to go forward, you got to get up and run. And the old deacon said, let her run, brother, let her run. And he said, and if this church is going to go forward, we got to get up and fly. And the deacon was up waving his arms and said, let her fly, brother, let her fly. And the preacher said, if this church is going to fly, it's going to take time and work and money. The old deacon said, let her walk. And then a couple of, I'm going to tell you, these are little short stories. A performance story in an event is anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes. And it's not unusual for a storyteller to do 3 stories that would be between 45 minutes and an hour. Have any of you ever been to Jonesboro to the festival? Well, you need to go. I mean, you just to see what a performance storyteller does. And I'll give you a couple of those before you get out of here. My father, like I said, my father was born in 1899, and he told me this story. When he was a boy, it was back when it was bad manners for anybody to take the last serving of anything on the plate. Everybody would dress for dinner, and so it was Sunday afternoon, and he went over to his Uncle Bob's house, and it was just a hot Sunday afternoon, and he said that the food had gone around the table, the sun had gone down, it was getting dark, and the heavy wind came up and blew through the house, and it blew all the lamps out in the house. And he said it just as soon as it got pitch black dark in the bedroom, there was this blood-curdling scream in the dining room, when it got dark in the dining room. And this blood-curdling scream, and my daddy said he jumped up and lit the lamp in the dining room, and there was his Uncle Bob's hand on a piece of fried chicken, the last piece of fried chicken with 5 forks stuck on it. Everybody was diving for the chicken. See? And so, I'll tell you one more. This is just funny. My granddaddy told me this. My granddaddy was born, he was the son of a Civil War soldier that got shot at Gettysburg. My great-grandfather was shot at Gettysburg, and his sergeant or whomever sent him over to the medical tent, and he saw him sawing off legs and arms of people, and he had been shot in the leg, and he said, that's not happening to me. And he slipped off in the woods, stole a mule that was just hanging out, and rode back from Gettysburg back to Charlotte, North Carolina. And as my father said, died with a mini ball still in his leg. But they were cotton farmers. And back during this history of after the Civil War and on into the 1920s, that it was like starvation for everybody, and they would raise their cotton crops, and when it came time to pick the cotton, everybody would just group up. It'd be all the men in the neighborhood would come and work the cotton crop. They would go from farm to farm to farm, helping their neighbors. And this one day, my grandpa told me that they'd worked in this field until this storm came up, and it just started raining, just cats and dogs, literally. And there's an old tenant house over next to the edge of the cotton field, and so all the men raced over to get in the the cabin, and before it was over, one of the men was taking a chilling, he went over and built a fire in the old fireplace. Maybe he hadn't had a fire in 20 years. And when the flames got up good and big, this black cat dropped right out of the chimney, right into the fire, and his head spun around, his eyes glowed, and it scared the man so bad he just took out running. He was superstitious to begin with, and he ran all the way to Florida. and he got into a swamp in Florida. He crawled up into a hollow log, and just coming in on the other side of that hollow log was that cat. And the cat said, "My, we had a fine race, didn't we?" And the man said back, "Not like the one we're gonna have." Anyway, so this, I'm going to talk about Barter Theater. So, in 1997, there was, and that's when I started this, for real. There was a news article. You know how Barter touts themselves about what they're doing, and they put in a news article that said that on Sunday nights, the night that typically the theater's dark, that they were going to start doing storytelling. And Allison read it, and she said, Allison, for those that don't know, is my wife. She had read it, and she said, "You know, Isaac, this may be something that you, since you spent your whole lifetime telling stories, maybe you could do this and get on stage at Barter." And so I clipped the article and took it to my office, and the next day I called Rick Rose, who was the director at Barter, and told him that I wanted to be on stage to tell stories. And I could actually feel his eyes milking shut when I was telling him of my talent. And he said, "Well, you know, Isaac, you're just going to have to go through my producer. I've got a man that's producing this. His name is Rocky Rockwell." And so I was, incensed, my personality, and I hung the phone up and I thought, hell, I know Howard McElroy. He's the chairman of the board of directors at Barter. I'll just call him up and tell him. So I did, called Howard, same feeling, but Howard could care less that I had this talent. And he said, the only thing I can advise you is that we've got a producer doing those events. His name's Rocky Rockwell. And so here's his phone number. And so it laid there on the desk for a week or so, and I thought, well, what the heck, I'll just call old Rocky. I called him up, and he said, "Well, I'm glad you do this. I've never heard of you before, but we're bringing in some national storytellers for this." And he said, "You just send me a tape of some of your stuff." And I thought, well, I preached once at the Methodist church, and I know they recorded that, and people did laugh all the way through my sermon. And I thought, and I've spoken to Rotary, and I know at least one of those programs was recorded. Maybe I could find that, and I couldn't. And so, on one Sunday morning, at about 8 o'clock, I went to my office, picked up my dictaphone, and dictated my best stories, which would have included Bob Carter's Deacon and the trip to Florida and the black cat. And it really gave me my best stuff. Well, 3 days later, I got a 5-page letter from Rocky Rockwell. A letter of rejection. And I thought, hell, 5 pages, why can't you just say it in half a page? And so I just threw the letter on the chest of drawers, and a few days later, Alice came back to me and said, "Isaac, this poor man was trying to help you, not hurt you. And instead of taking this as a rejection, you need to read the letter again and do what he says." And so that's what I did. And I met him and his wife, who were what you would describe as semi-professionals. They would charge for doing stories, but they didn't have any desire to travel around the nation and do it. And so we formed a group in Abington, and we would meet once a month and work on stories together and take one event and try to mold it into a story. And then before it was over, I was on stage at Barter Theater. It took about 18 months to happen, but it happened. And so I'm going to tell you the story. And if y'all heard this, just tell me and I'll quit. But and so this story is true. I'd been out of college just a short time and had come back to Bristol to live with my parents when I realized that both my mother and father just had become impossible to live with when I went off to college. I mean, it was just how dumb did my father get in such a short amount of time. And so he came to me one day and said, Isaac, I'm going to suggest that maybe you move. We've had enough of you, and you've had enough of us. And so I remembered this house, and some of you are familiar with the old Jonesboro Road that goes from Bristol to Abington. And back in 1967, it was just a country lane and maybe 5 or 6 farms all the way from High Point, a place called High Point, to the edge of Abington. And High Point, there was a little Presbyterian church there at High Point. You could park your car there at the church, cross the road, and bird hunt all the way from that big barn. If any of you remember the big barn, it basically just sat right out in the middle of, you'd have to make a 90-degree turn to avoid this barn. We could go in there and hunt all the way to Abington. And of course, it would take all day to make the round trip. But in that path, there was this old mansion house that sat way over in the middle of a farm. And I thought I knew who owned it, and I went to him, and he said, yeah, I'll rent you. It's a 12-room house. And he said, I'll rent it to you. How about $60 a month? $60 a month for a 12-room house. So I made the deal right then. And so the first day I moved a table and a bed out there, and realized pretty soon that I had not called Appalachian Power Company to have the power turned on. So I basically just sat on the front porch. I didn't even have a chair. I sat on the front porch until it got plumb dark, and then I went in to go to bed. And so as I was taking my britches off, I had just unbuckled. I was bent over, and something touched the top of my head. And man, I was paralyzed. I figured I just stood there. There was no ifs, ands, and buts. Something touched my head. So after about 5 minutes, I raised up a little bit. Something touched the top of my head. And I just backed out of the room, pulled up my britches, ran down, got my car, and went to Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge, which is what is now exit 10 on the interstate. So the next day, I went home, went back, and looked around, realized that there was a bat had been in my bedroom. So I spent the next day bat-proofing the house. I closed every window, nailed them shut, stuffed items up in the chimney. There were 8 doors to the outside of this house. So I made sure that all of them but one was locked up. That very night, I got in bed, and up above me, this door opened. Footsteps went across the hall, went into another room. The door opened and closed. Gosh, I just went in there, I could hear steps back across, and the first door closed. Man, I was out of there like flush quail. I was over at Howard Johnson in just moments. So I spent the next week human-proof. I thought I had someone living in the house with me. And I did everything I could to make sure that every opening was closed, everything was closed. And went to bed with a large flashlight, one of the big 6-battery flashlights. Up about 2 o'clock in the morning, that door opened, footsteps across the hall. Again, I was out of there. So then I put a hasp on both of those doors. I went upstairs, put a little brace, put a hinge, put a hasp in it. Went to bed. I heard something hit the ground like a popsicle stick. I thought, oh Lord, there's the first hasp. Footsteps, another hasp, the door opened, then the door closed, and I thought, I'm going to just take this flashlight and go up and see what's up. And so I walked up, I got about halfway up the stairwell, and I thought, I may be the first person ever to check in Howard Johnson's naked. And then I went over and checked into Howard Johnson's, and before it was over, people at Howard Johnson's had given me my own key to room 101. And I had that key for 5 years, and they would send me a bill at the end of each month. And then it came time for me to go to law school. It was 1971. I'd endured this $60 a month rent, and obviously I got cheap because of what was going on in the house. And my father was retiring, and he said, well, maybe we could just move in. And he's a Presbyterian minister, so all their houses have been furnished to them. So he said, how about me just moving into what we call the White House? And so they did. And I went to law school, and I'd get letters from my mother and father. And they were Christian people, believe you me. But they'd talk about what Mr. Ghost was up to. And it became so real about the ghost this and the ghost that. And it came to Christmas time, and I couldn't wait to get home. Drove all the way across the state of Tennessee, came up to exit 10 or 7, whatever it was, 14, 13. It's 13. They've changed the number since I went there, just so that you'll know, man. I know who you are, and you know who I am. I'm not that confused. But they've changed the number since I lived there. So I drove down the little lane, couldn't wait to get there, and when I ran up on the front porch, there was a note pinned on the window of the front door that said, ho, 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 welcome home, Isaac, Merry Christmas. Your room is waiting at the Howard Johnson's, ho, ho, ho. So that's a true story. And they never did get rid of the ghost, and finally that house has been taken down. The family the Cozart family that had the tobacco warehouses. Some of you may remember the Cozarts. And so that was actually not a story that I planned to tell, but it just fit into going to Barter Theater because that was the story I told at Barter the first time I went there. Tell me what time it is.
It's 10:03. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go through a couple more stories here. After I'd been to the Barter a couple of times, I met a man named Overbay from Jonesboro, and he said, just come down here, I'll get you on stage. And everybody in the area knew about Jonesboro because it had become where the national centers constructed. And when I was going to law school, I had a friend who said, Isaac, you're wasting your time going to law school. Let me take you to Jonesboro and you enter that storytelling contest. And I didn't do it. You know, I didn't get there for 60 years, you know, like 60 years later, or 40 years later. And so he said, if you come down there, I'll get you on stage. And so I started going to Jonesboro, and he got me on stage. And that's when the first night I was there, that's when I told about growing up with Nazma, my buddy. Y'all, okay, so I had this pal named Nazma Nidifer. Now, if you lived in Bristol, you'd say Nidifer. But in Elizabethton, you'd say Nidifer. It's just, they were just more countrified, don't you know, in Elizabeth. And so I told about Nazmo. Well, let me tell you about Nazmo. His mother, Ms. Nidifer, was in her 40s when she got pregnant for the first time. And she thought she was going to have Christ. She was so excited. And, pardon me. Anyway, she wanted to, everybody at that time in history would just get a midwife to come by the house, but boy, Ms. Nidifer was going to go to a hospital, and she went over to the Johnson City Hospital to have this baby, and so she delivered the baby, and she was in a maternity ward, and the nurse came in and said, what are you going to name the baby? And she said, look, I don't even know if it's a boy or a girl. And the nurse said, well, it's a boy. And before she could come out with the name, she just drifted off back to sleep. And in a few minutes, she woke up, and there was a sign on the wall that said King, K-I-N-G. And she said, well, I know he's just a prince now, but one day he'll be a king. I'm going to name him King. It's such a famous name here in East Tennessee. There's King Sport and King College and H.B. King Company and King's Department Store. I'll name him King. It's so famous. And so then she drifted back off to sleep, and she woke up again, and there was a sign on the wall. I mean, literally on the wall, and it said Nazmo. And she thought, I have never heard that name, but obviously God wants to make me name that kid Nazmo. I'm naming Nazmo King Nidifer. And so that's what they did. They named him. And you know what had happened? They named him for a no smoking sign on the swinging door with a maternity ward. And poor Nazmo, anyway, I'm not going to tell you anything more about him except to say he's still alive. He's 2 years older than me. He's played professional baseball. He became elected county road commissioner in Carter County, Tennessee. Then he got state road commissioner, and then he became the road commissioner in Arkansas and went to the penitentiary for fraud. And so that's where I missed him for years. He just disappeared. And he's back living in Milligan. So y'all know where Milligan College is. He lives right on the outskirts in the house there. And I will tell you this, that he's just getting over a broken leg. He was coming out of the shower, and he somehow stepped on his towel and it was a shower curtain, stepped on the shower curtain, turned around backwards, and came out of the shower and stepped into the commode and fell over backwards. Well, it broke his leg. And when the EMS came, you think I'm lying about this, it's absolutely true. And so by the time the EMS got there, his leg had swelled up so much, his foot jammed down in the bottom, and his leg was broken. They had to unbolt the commode and take him to the hospital with the commode bone still on his leg, and the surgeon, the orthopod, took a hammer and knocked the thing off, and they set his leg, and he and the orthopod thought this is too good to be true, so he formed a commode-shaped cast for Nosmo's foot, and then put one of those red rubber stoppers, you know, that slams down to what they now call a flap in a commode. Had one of those on his on the bottom, he walked on. And he moved from the cast. I saw him with the cast on. It was pretty daggone funny, actually. And so then he got an air cast. And so what he'd do is put that air cast on and go over and stand at the 7-Eleven at Milligan and just stand at the beer counter and just stare at the beer. And then some poor woman would come in, feel sorry for him, and say, "What brand do you want, honey?" And say, "Hey, free beer." I mean, he was using that cast to get free beer. Well, anyway, Nosmo and I have about three hours of stories just on Nosmo, and you have that CD. Are you familiar? Do you remember Nosmo?
I do.
Okay, so I'm going to conclude. You know, this is what happens. Don't ever call me in January to do an April show again. This is what I have, and I haven't even touched what I wrote down.
Yeah, next year.
Well, you know, there are so many things that I want. Are y'all okay? What if I go over a little bit? Okay. Okay. Before I was a famous storyteller, I know you won't believe this, but when I go to Jonesboro, I have groupies. You think I'm lying? It's not like I'm some musical group or anything, but there are certain people that will only come to see me. Gosh, what a lesson that is for someone as strong an ego. But so, before, I guess it was it was when I was in college. I met this guy. Gosh, I'm going to have to tell two. Is that okay? Okay, so when I was in college, I met this guy named Hap Hughley. Now remember that name. We're going to come back to it. And Hap lived next door to me in the fraternity house. And he loved old-time country music. And he would play Jimmy Rogers songs over and over and over again. And so I learned these songs just basically listening through the wall. Like T for Texas, T for Tennessee, that was a big y'all. T for Thelma, that gal done made a wreck out of me. T for Texas, T for Tennessee, T for Texas, T for Tennessee, T for Thelma. That gal done made a wreck out of me. You leo. If you don't want me, mama, you sure don't have to call. If you don't want me, mama, you sure don't have to call. I can get more women than a passenger train can haul. Gonna get me a pistol, great long shiny barrel. Get me a pistol, great long shiny barrel. Gonna shoot poor Thelma. Just sit down, jump in, you leo. Gonna get me a shotgun, long as I'm tall. Give me a shotgun, long as I'm tall. Gonna shoot that brown bird. That's stole away like you leo. And then it goes on. I'd rather drink muddy water, sleep in a hollow log. Drink muddy water, sleep in a hollow log, than be in Atlanta. Getting treated like a dirty dog. You leo. Last one. Going where the water tastes like cherry wine. Going where the water tastes like cherry wine. This Georgia water tastes like turpentine. Okay, and then all around the to a brakeman to give him a line of talk. He said, son, if you got money, I'll say that you don't want. Ha, ha, ha. Well, I ain't got a nickel, not a penny can I show. He said, get off, you railroad bum. He slammed the boxcar door. Sorry, Mom. He put me out in Texas, a state of daily love. Wide open spaces all around me, moon, stars above. Nobody seems to want me or give me a helping hand. I'm on my way from Frisco, going back to Dixieland. Well, my pocketbook is empty, not a penny can I show. He said, get off, you railroad bum. He slammed the boxcar door. Now, y'all know that song. Well, anyway, and so for years, and it always involved beer for some reason. You get a couple of beers down and you just start singing. And so, like I said, I was a famous singer. I could come up with all these old songs. Little old band of gold, you're back again with me. Instead on her finger where you used to be. No, tell me true, did she laugh or cry when she left you on the bedstead? Where I lie. Y'all know that one. Right at the old 97. I'm going to do one more just because I know it. They gave him his orders in Monroe, Virginia, saying, Steve, you're way behind time. This is not 38, but old 97. You got to make expense on time. He turned around and said to his black, greasy fireman, just shovel on a little more coal. When we reach that ridge on White Oak Mountain, you can see old 97 roll. He was going around a bend doing 90 miles an hour when his whistle broke into a scream. It was in that he was found in the wreck with his hand on the throttle and to death by steam. The letter come from Washington City, and this is how it read. The brave engineer of old 97 is in Danville, and he's dead. There's one more verse that I know, so just listen to what I have. Oh, now all you railroad wise, from this take a warning. From this time on and learn, never speak hard words to your true loving husband, because he may leave you and never return. There you go. And so when I met Alice, and you know, I've told y'all this, Alice only had 5 dates and then we got married. But during that time, I'd become obsessed with singing another song called Just a Bowl of Butter Beans. Y'all know, Bill, you know, just a bowl of butter beans, pass the biscuits if you please. I don't want no collard greens, just a bowl of butter beans. I don't want no country ham, nary a cornbread, thank you ma'am. I don't want no collard greens, just a bowl of butter beans. Well, I sang that song so much that people were, they call me Yodeling Isaac. That was my nickname. And they started calling Alice the Butterbean Queen. Okay, so when we got married, and Elle knows my family, not my family, Alice's family. Instead of putting bowls of rice out to throw when we left the church, they put out bowls of butter beans. And it was like being in a rock fight. They were throwing butter beans at wham! I had pock marks all over my face. In fact, I had enough butter beans still in my jacket that I gave each of my daughters a butter bean to walk down the aisle at Royal Oak when they got married here in Marion. I had like 10 butter beans left in my going away outfit, don't you know? And then my father-in-law, he got confused. He had stopped by Food Line, and instead of buying butter beans, he bought a number 10 tin can of 4 cooked lemons, a big old hog butter. And he was doing like this. Boom! And it's like I was totally stucco with butter beans. And so every time I sing this song, I start reminiscing about my childhood, because we'd go down down on my grandfather's farm in Charlotte, right there next to the airport. And he had what's called a section of land. It's a square mile. It's a mile in each direction. And he was a farmer, and he did row crops. And so even as a small child, even when when we were avoiding polio, like you're going to hear about, we'd go down there and we'd have to work in the field. We'd come down in the morning, you'd be wearing a little white t-shirt and khaki breeches and shoes with no socks, and you'd have a handkerchief. And if you tie a knot in every corner of a handkerchief and hang it on your head, the gnats don't bother you. I know you look stupid. And especially if you get older and wear one on a golf course. But we would dress with a little, and we call them a gnat net. We put a handkerchief on our head, and we go out, and my brother would get on one side of the row, and I'd be on the other, and we'd cross hoe. He'd be hoeing on my side, I'd be hoeing on his side. And we'd go all the way down the field. And so for breakfast, we'd go down, and my grandmother would give me breakfast. You know what she'd give me? A pint of dried apples. A pint of dried apples. And then we'd work all morning. We'd go down one road, 1 mile, back 2 miles, back again 3 miles. You get the drift. Then she'd come out at lunch to feed us lunch. You know what she'd give me? A quart of water. I drink that water, those apples would blow up. I look like a Biafran war baby. And the old belly sticking out, have to work all afternoon. And then at the end of the day, we go up to the house, and it was more food than you could imagine. Everybody went to the house to eat. All the field hands, anybody helping, all the in-laws, everybody would be there to eat supper. There'd be green beans and lima beans. There'd be cantaloupe, watermelon, city ham, country ham, roast beef. Everything was laid out. And I'd just be worn out. I'd have like 15 sweat necklaces. Be totally sunburned all over. My grandma would say, "Come here, Isaac, let me fix you a plate." And I'd say, "No, I'm just not hungry." Yeah, let me fix you a plate. And I'd say, "No, I just can't eat a bite." And she'd say, "Yeah, let me fix you some country ham." And you know what I'd do? I'd look her right in the eye and say, "I don't want no country ham. Nary a biscuit, thank you, ma'am. I don't want no collard greens, just a bowl of butter beans." Thank you. So here's another conclude. So I only have to tell 2 more. One of them's really short. It's what I said at the beginning: true stories, consequences. So this is a true story. I was invited to write a story about Beaver Creek. It starts in Washington County and flows all the way through every farm in the Central Valley of Washington County, through the city of Bristol, both Virginia and Tennessee, down by the racetrack, and it empties into the Holston River at Bluff City. So I took a true event that happened to my friend Pat Hughley when we were in college, and I transposed him from Knoxville to Bristol and wrote the story about him in Beaver Creek. And so this is the story, that he was born in a place called Harley Springs, Virginia, which is in Washington County. It's just northwest of Abington. And he was a really good student, but boy, he was a countrified kid. He was truly a boy countrified. But the people at the little church that he went to decided he was too smart to ignore, and so they got up the money for him to go to King College and be a student. Well, he came in there, and he was just different. He was truly a countrified kid, and he chewed tobacco all the time. And just within days, he fell in love with this girl named Sue Ellen Harr, and we call her Sue E. Because we called him Hogley. We named him the Hog Man because he was so countrified. So we had the Hog Man and his girlfriend Sue E. And they were just desperately in love with each other. They could see him kissing between classes and all that stuff. And so it just rolled around to the end of October, and Mr. Harr, Sue E. was from down in Bluff City, so, and you still see the name in the newspaper, Harrs, just like the night difference. Anyway, she had come up, and Mr. Harr met Hogley and just was horrified at his appearance, and the fact that his daughter was going with her. It was just awful for him. And so he told her that if she kept dating him, that he was going to disown her. You've got to stop. And so she broke up with Hogley, and happens is he was devastated. And so he got in his room that night, and he was playing his record player, and it was I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. He'd play it, the needle would go back and play it again. I'm so lonesome I couldn't cry. And then all of a sudden I heard the door slam, and he left. And so the next day I saw him, and he was just awful. He had mud all over his clothes, and he smelled like liquor, and just was in terrible shape. And I said, "What in the world happened?" He said, "Well," said, "last night," said, "I was thinking about old Sue Ellen, and I was going to go down to Bluff City, and just whip that man, just whip him good, Mr. Harr." And then I was going to beg back. And he said, "By the time I got to Bluff City, I just decided to kill myself." So he said, "I walked out on the railroad bridge there at Bluff City where the lake is now, and he jumped off right where Beaver Creek came into the Holston River. And what he had counted on was the water was only this deep, but the mud was bottomless. And he pierced that mud just like an arrow coming out of a bow. And so he was dead drunk, standing up in the mud. It only came up this far. And he couldn't drown himself. He said he'd lean backwards, couldn't make it. He'd try to lean forward, he couldn't make it. And then he sobered up. And he said it took him a couple of hours to pull himself out of the mud to get to the bank. And he said he tried to hitchhike back to King College. No one would pick him up, so he had to walk all the way back. And I said, "Gosh, this is terrible." I said, and he said, "I'll tell you one thing." He said, that's the last time I'm going to try to kill myself. I almost died." Okay. So that was my story about Beaver Creek. So I was visiting with my secretary. I told her the story, and I said, I told this story in Louisville, Kentucky, at a festival. And when it was over, a woman came up to me and said, "Are you talking about Hap Hughley from Manchester, Tennessee?" And I said, "Actually, yes." When I told the story in Louisville, I'd used his real name. I didn't give him a fictitious name. I used his real name, and she came up and said, what I just said about Manchester, and I said, "That's him." And she said, "He's my uncle. He's a Methodist minister in Tennessee." So I told this to my secretary in Abingdon. Just a couple of years ago. And so she said, let me just look him up on the internet. And she put in Hap Hughley, Methodist Minister, Tennessee, and it came up. And she said, well, he's on Facebook. And so she wrote a note to Hap on Facebook that said, do you remember Isaac Freeman? Just within 2 minutes, the message came back. Yes, I remember Isaac. He's the biggest liar you've ever met. You cannot believe a word he says. Consequence. I just slipped out the wrong name. And here's the last thing. So back when their kids were young, we go back and forth to Danville, and when they got up to a certain age, he said, don't touch me, don't touch me. You know how that goes. He's breathing on me. So I bought a Suburban. And Alice and I sat up front, and two kids were in each respective corner, and in the third seat, respective corner, and we got as far as Hillsville, and they were just all over each other, and just on the east edge of Hillsville, I said, okay, I don't want to hear another word from any of you, none of you. I don't want to hear a peep. At which point, my daughter Walker said, beep. And so I knew, boy, it was down, so I just pulled right into the first driveway that I got to, pulled left into it, taking off my belt, getting out, and I've never whipped one of my children, taking off my belt. I said, come out of that car right now. We went behind the Suburban, and I said, okay, Walker, I'm going to slap the tire with this belt. And every time I slap the tire, you scream. So, bam, boo, bam, boo, bam, boo. We got back in the car, not a peep. And we go about a mile when Alice just looked over me and she said, how dare you? We rode in total silence all the way down. Okay, so that's the story. 2 years ago, we were on a family vacation down in Florida, sitting at the dining room table one evening, and the word peep was used. And I laughed, and Walker laughed, and all of a sudden Claire started crying. Scotty started wringing her hands and looking like, oh my God, she's used the word peep. And I told them the truth. Not Claire and Scott were so upset. They had lived with this horrible anxiety about me whipping poor little Walker, who was only like 2.5 years old. Consequences. Okay, that's it, folks. I'll just have to come back. I mean, just give me I'm not going to tell any more stories. Okay. There's enough here for 3 more times, and not even, I did,
Looking for the next 3 years, you can open us up every
well, you know something, I'm getting up there in age. I did a show, let me start when Barter Theater, when the Lincoln Theater was still just a theory. Was about the time I got into storytelling, and we're meeting some storytellers. And so we developed an event at Hungry Mother Park at Hemlock Haven, where people could come in and buy supper for $10 and then have a show of storytellers. And we did that to prove that we could have a live audience with an event, and people would pay to come to it, because there was a lot of ambivalence about the Lincoln at that time. Bill very enthusiastic about it. Many other people were, but there were so many naysayers that it just wouldn't work. And so we did that for 3 or 4 years, and some of you came to that. We'd have a simple dinner, and then we'd have some nationally known storytellers. I know that Donald Davis came, and Bill Lepp was here, and Doc McConnell, and so we proved that storytelling could be an event. And then at some point when they did the Sherwood Anderson event, they let me do an hour on stage there, just about the Buck Fever family. You know the Fevers. Hay Fever. His name's H.A. Fever, and they called him Hay. And his wife, Minerva, who when they found her birth certificate was really malaria. The midwife didn't know how to spell Minerva, but she knew one word that started with an M, and it was malaria. And so she wrote down malaria fever, and that was her real true name. And they had 2 daughters, Scarlet and Spring. And then they had 4 boys, Buck 1, Buck 2, Buck 3, and Buck 4. They called them Big Buck, Little Buck, Buck, and Bucky. Let me mention one other thing. So these are characters. Nosmo, I have a series of stories about Virgil, the turkey that I own, Ada, the mule, and then my favorite was this kid, Doug Ass. His name was Douglas Bailey, and he ended up being an Episcopal priest in New England, and became a bishop. And you had to bring your birth certificate to the boys club to prove how old you were so you could sign up for Little League Baseball. And when he brought his birth certificate in, the midwife had misspelled his name, and instead of D-O-U-G-L-A-S, she had spelled it D-O-U-G-A-S-S. So by the time he was 10 years old, he was Doug Ass. We never called him Douglas again. And even the teachers at school would call him Doug Ass. It was just hilarious. Well, thank you very much.